I guess let's start. There's also a recording, so I will send to the attendees afterwards. So hopefully they're joining in. So hi, my name is Alexander. Good day, good morning from New York City. I'm running the FinTech Leaders Program, which is bringing Berlin FinTechs to the US market, which is really challenging, but also promising for Berlin FinTech to scale the business. And beyond this webinar, we are running several activities this year. I want to stress out the workshop, the two-day sprint workshop with weGrow, which is with me today here, Cassandra and Hasan, who will with me run and facilitate a two-day workshop, which is the in-depth coaching in order to adjust your business model for the US market and pitch in front an international investors jury on the following day, which is a bigger event. If you need any information, or if you happen to know any fintech who might be interested in be registering in this program, in a two-day program, please reach out to me after this webinar. I think this webinar is the first step, and the workshop the extension of it today. So because today we're talking about readiness, I guess readiness is touching several factors in order to make it in the US. It's not only HR related, talent recruitment, it's not only product related, it's also a mindset thing. So being ready, it's I think the first step if you're thinking of getting to US market. And this is actually also our focus of the program to get you ready to beat the big beast here, the US market, and conquer hopefully the market, which is quite a challenging, but as I said, a really good one to be in. So today, readiness, I guess we can start. Hopefully more attendees will come along. Let's have an informative and engaging day. Let's see if we stick to the 2 hours. But Cassandra and Hasan from weGrow will run the show. Please do so, and I will be in the background for any questions.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, Alexander. Hi, my name is Cassandra, and this is my colleague Hasan Tahir. We are with weGrow International, and we are experts in international expansion for startups and scale-ups. We were meant to have a third person with us today, a guest speaker, Daniela from Cathay Innovation. And unfortunately, she is very sick today. And because she's based in San Francisco, she messaged us at 6 a.m. her time to let us know that she was unable to come. So it's me, Hasan, and Alexander, and we will bring you as enriching content as possible without her. She was initially only scheduled to join for half of the program. So if there are questions that we can't answer, we're happy to pass those along to her. And of course, we'll give you as much of our expertise as we can. You can probably hear that I'm American. So I do have some familiarity with the US market and the startup scene there. I'm just not a VC. And Hasan is a growth expert himself. Do you want to give us your credentials, Hasan?
Yes. Hi, guys. I don't sound American because I'm not, but I look after growth and experimentation when you're finding new markets. And especially if you're going into, a completely new territory, that's where you want to de-risk yourself as much as possible. And this is where I come in. I do have a background in B2B marketing, so I do think that I would be able to find common ground with most of you all. And if you're watching this and you will be joining the next 2 days, the 2 days that we're scheduled in March, I am excited to see you then, and we'll talk about all of this in more depth.
Excellent. So because this is a webinar and not just a regular Zoom meeting, normally I would encourage you to interrupt me if you have any questions, and I still encourage you to do that. Please, if you have a question, put it in the chat or raise your hands so that we can make sure to address that. And we will get started. So, boom, there we are. And to get started, we're going to do a little icebreaker. So Hasan will help me out because I can't see the chat since I'm presenting my screen. But the icebreaker is a game that you may have played in a different context. But the game is called Two Truths and a Lie. So I'm going to tell 3 stories about international expansion. And after I've told these 3 stories, I will ask you to identify which of the stories was a lie and which were true. So 2 of these are true, 1 is a lie. Which one is the lie? Your job to figure out. At the end, there's a special prize. First story. So this is a story about students selling to CEOs. Hasan and I are based in the Netherlands, which is a country that does not really have a hierarchy in sort of professional settings. Like obviously, you know, there's somebody at the top, but for the most part, decision-making and input and responsibilities are very flat across an organization. What that means is that a Dutch organization might have interns or trainees who have big responsibilities. And in this specific story, we had a e-commerce company based in the Netherlands that was expanding to Germany, a country where hierarchy is much more highly valued than it is in this country. And the trainees and interns were attempting to sell to German senior managers. So the decision makers in Germany were very high level. And what they found was that the high level German employees were offended to have outreach conducted by interns. This just didn't work for them. They needed a hierarchical system, and they wanted somebody senior selling to somebody senior. So, yikes. That's the first story. Is that yikes a true one or a false one? Next story, forgetting to hire a country manager. So this is a story about an American software as a service company, again, expanding to Germany. Our examples today are German or American as much as possible. And in the US, the notice period for an employee might be 2 weeks. Maybe if they have a contract, it's longer, but it could also be 0. In the US, we have what's called at-will employment, which means that you can hire and fire at will. You can go into the office on Monday and be told Monday morning that you no longer have a job, and vice versa. So this American company was like, "Oh, it'll take us a couple months to find a manager in Germany." They didn't realize was that in Germany, the notice period is actually 2 months or longer, depending on seniority. And by the time they found someone, they were already 6 months behind their projected timeline. Yikes. Last story. Selling the wrong chocolate. So this is a story about a British company that was expanding their chocolate sales to the US. In Britain, chocolate tends to be a bit more tart, a bit more bitter than American chocolate, where we really like our hydrogenated oils and high fructose corn syrup. So this British chocolatier was trying to sell to Americans, but they hadn't adjusted for the American taste buds. And what they found was that Americans as a whole weren't really interested in this bitter chocolate. Yikes. So, question for you, my audience members. Which of these stories is a lie? Is it students selling to CEOs? Is it not knowing the notice period in the expansion country? Or is it selling bitter chocolate to sweet-toothed Americans? What do you guys think? You can put it in the chat. Laura says selling the wrong chocolate. Jan says forgot to hire a country manager. Saeed says first and second one, true. Ulrike says, number 3 is like, excellent. I love it when the audience disagrees. So thank you all for having different answers. That's perfect. Dum, 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 dum. The reveal. Number 2 was the lie. So your prize, if you got this right, I think Saeed, you did, is the satisfaction of being right. Congratulations. The reason why it makes me really happy that people chose all sorts of different stories here is because the real truth is that all of these are mistakes that you can make when you're expanding internationally. And so you picked different answers because they're all plausible. It's possible that you could expand to a new market and not know the business culture, or not know the labor market, or not know how your new customer differs from your old customer. These are all mistakes that are easy to make, but also really easy to prevent, which is why we at weGrow have a job, because we are out here supporting the 0.4% of companies, of startups that scale internationally. It's already a really low percentage. And with this sort of mistakes that are really easy to make, pitfalls that are common to fall into, that 0.4% success rate can be quite low. So we're out here to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that you know the notice period in the country that you are expanding to, among other things. And you know the questions to ask, because it's not just, do you know the notice period? It's, do you know to think, oh, I wonder if the notice period is different? That's really the key question here, right? Hasan, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very alarming number, right? And why does this happen? So yes, there are certain problems that we talked about in the icebreaker, but what's important to know is that there are ways to de-risk your expansion. There are ways to not kind of spread yourselves out too thin. There is this concept of the valley of death. So you guys must have heard about this one time, time period, that as a startup, you need to survive the first 3 years. If you survive 3 years, then you've kind of proven that, you have this running meter. Yes, 3 years up and down, it might be true. So that's that first part that you're seeing over here. Like, if you're able to survive that, that's great. That's the first valley of death, where a lot of startups just fail. They don't really have a revenue model that works for them, that's scalable enough. They probably don't have a product that's customer centric. And those are the startups that don't really make past that first valley of death. But then the second valley of death, we call it the screw up zone. And this is essentially when you realize that, actually, you know what, I'm doing really well in my home market. You get really overconfident and you're like, okay, yes, I can really replicate this in every other market. There are people at weGrow, in fact, quite a few people in weGrow who have been part of startups that really screwed up in the screw up zone. What happens at that point is that overconfidence makes you think that you replicate the same thing. You end up spreading yourselves through too thin. You remove focus from your home market. You don't have finances to support your international growth. You've already hired and recruited people in those markets, and now you are unfortunately in that second valley of death. And this generally happens when you want to expand into these new markets. So like I said, that it's not all dark and deathly, international expansion, although it is complex, but there is a step-by-step process that you can follow to just make sure that you are conscious and aware of what's coming your way. So at weGrow, what we've done is we've developed this proven kind of methodology for international expansion. And maybe I can just walk you through the 6 steps that we've identified that are critical for a de-risked expansion strategy. So the first step, and we will talk about these things in detail as well, The first step is to really kind of introspect, look within yourself and like think about, are you even ready for international expansion? Do you have the finances? Do you have, international expansion experience or cultural awareness or a local product market fit? So these are things that we will talk about in detail. But the first step is you kind of look within and ask yourself if right now is the right time to go or not. Based on this, if it is, which hopefully it is, then you check that off and then you start looking at, okay, what are my potential markets? And that's step 2, right? You don't want to commit to a market that has a low product market fit. You don't want to be that chocolate company selling bitter dark chocolate in a market that's not going to appreciate it, right? So you go through this round of putting together a long list of markets, and you turn that long list into short list by looking at the attractiveness of those markets and your fit in that market as well. So you don't want to go to a big market just because there's a lot of potential over there. You also want to keep in mind that your product fits in that market or not. So by doing this, you've consciously selected the markets and you've narrowed down to a short list of maybe top 2 markets that you are interested in and want to take it seriously. Then you move on to step number 3, which is, yes, we know about the market potential. We know about the attractiveness of that market as well. But how can we prove our local product market fit? How do we prove our expansion strategy going in so that there are no surprises waiting for us as we expand with our market? So over here, you want to take validation really seriously. And a lot of times, and I find it really surprising, that businesses don't take this validation step really easy. And I guess that is also the startup, culture of, just want to hustle. But at times it is important to kind of just dip your feet in. This is what my entire career has been about, like dipping your feet in, experimenting, trying things out and validating it before you dive in, right? So we have quite a few things that we will talk about in the 2 days in March. We'll go deep into validation. So by that, your expansion strategy. Then you come to step 4, where you turn that strategy, those insights that you receive through your validation process into a plan, into budget, into action steps, into resources that you need, into KPIs that you need to measure. So that's all that goes into planning. And then comes step 5, which is generally what people completely jump to, which is you start hiring people, you start talking to partners, you start reaching out to your potential customers, and you kind of navigate and roll out your launch strategy, which you've mapped out in the previous step. And then step 6 is you don't want to leave it at that one market, right? You want to be able to internally in your company enable people to be able to do that in other markets as well and repeat that process. And that's where you learn from what you did in the markets that you were going in, you document those learnings, you make a playbook, and you take other people in your organization along so that they are able to take that forward from there. We've applied this process to over 300 projects. You can see some names over here, names that you may be familiar with. This is our vanity slide. But essentially over here, you can see that, this is a tried and tested process. But then also how we do this is by obviously working with founders, expanding in different countries, but we have a network of experts around us that help us make the right decisions when it comes to it.
Thanks, Hasan.
End of first part.
Thank you very much. So we're going to go into sort of high-level US market considerations. And, again, please, if you have something to add, I'm sorry that you can't just unmute and shout it out, but feel free to add something in the chat. Hasan will be looking at it while I'm flipping through the slides, and he'll shout out if there's a question, right? Awesome, thanks. So I think one of the things that's really critical when we're thinking about US expansion is something that's critical in any context of expansion, which is understanding who and where your competitors are, knowing the landscape of what niche you are filling and maybe where your competitors might be offering slightly different value propositions. Maybe they're a little more expensive, but a little more niche, or maybe they're cheaper, but it's applicable to a wider audience. And where do you fall in between? So understanding that competitor landscape, especially in the US market, which is massive, is really important. And I think the other thing that you want to think about here is not just where are they in terms of value proposition, but where are they physically? Where are they addressing that market from? Is it from Silicon Valley? That used to be the default, much less so now, as other US cities are investing heavily in the development of tech and fintech ecosystems. So that's certainly something to consider. Hasan, you unmuted, so I think you have something to add here.
Yeah, I mean, while the US market is big, that could be intimidating, but that's great for us as well, because there is always a lot of data on the competitors that you're looking for. There's always, like, the US is literally just a hub of data as well. So just sitting in wherever you're sitting, right, in Berlin, or say you are in Canada, but wherever you are, like, you can start doing research on your competitors. You can start looking at where they are getting their traffic from, what channels have worked for them, what kind of ads do they create to generate traction, what states have the most traffic coming on to their particular solution. So there are tools out there that allow you to scrape this data off of your competitors' analytics. So just to name a few, there's SEMrush that can tell you information about that traffic, but there's also SparkToro that can tell you about just general trends and information collected from social profiles, including LinkedIn and including Twitter, things that are more B2B in nature as well. Sorry, back to you, Cassandra.
No, that's totally fine. Bye, Ulrike. Thanks for joining. So I think something else that's really critical to consider right now, and we have somebody in the audience who's US based. So Gabby, I might call on you just to ask if you could put in the chat your thoughts. You know, one of the biggest differences in terms of tech and fintech between the US and the EU is that the EU has GDPR and the US does not. Right, so Hasan is talking about the huge availability of data. The monetization of data, obviously in the US, looks very different than it does here in Europe. I think one of the real challenges is that in some ways the US market can be more fragmented than the EU market. What do I mean by that? I mean, at least in the EU market, even if you've got tons of different languages, there is one GDPR to rule them all. But in the US, you know, some states have these regulations. California, Virginia, Utah, and Colorado actually have sort of GDPR-ish regulations, but they're not all the same. And then other states don't have any data protection at all. So when you're thinking about, okay, you know, how am I going to interact as B2B or B2C? What does my data collection look like? What reporting requirements are there? That's going to change depending on the state that you are in terms of where you're based, but also in terms of where the customers are that you are serving. So confusingly, in the US, some states have laws where, like, for example, if you buy something on Amazon in New York State, you have to pay tax on that purchase because you live in New York State. But if you live in Washington, D.C., you don't have to pay tax. So you, the consumer, are affected by the regulation, but Amazon is responsible for implementing it. So this sort of fragmented, like, okay, how am I going to make sure to keep track of this? And how do I make sure to apply it? That's really critical and something to keep in mind in your US expansion.
Even more so in fintech.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And then the other thing is just like American perspective is that there is an assumption that you default are going to give the data and you have to opt out of giving your data. Whereas here, whenever I go to a website, it's like, oh, do you want to opt in? Do you want to give us your data? And usually my answer is no, but in the US, it's the other way around. So something to keep in mind also. But I think the other thing to think about right now, especially since we're talking specifically about FinTech, is that there is a huge market opportunity right now in the US in regards to consumer trust. So what we've seen recently is that a lot of FinTech companies have broken that consumer trust, and that there is suspicion amongst consumers, especially when we're looking at B2C platforms. Obviously, there's, a big one, SBF being a huge example of that right now. So when you're thinking, and the reason that this comes after GDPR is because coming from Germany, you are bringing with you this sort of European standard seal of approval, which sometimes can be to the detriment of a company expanding from Europe to the US. But in this case, I think is a huge opportunity because you have a guarantee that's backed by law that you already know how to implement. So you can talk about your value proposition in the context of consumer trust in big ways. The other thing to keep in mind from a FinTech perspective in particular is asking yourself this question, will things change? Like, are American companies going to be forced to catch up with GDPR? And the answer is historically, probably not for another 40 years. So what we see in the US is that when terrible things happen to consumers, there tends to be a 40 to 50 year interval between the terrible thing happening and an actual law being implemented to protect consumers. That's about the speed that our democracy is working at. So you see that with cigarettes, which weren't banned from movies. There were no warning labels on cigarettes until the 90s in the US, despite the fact that we'd known for 50 years how damaging to health they are. Trains, same thing, tons of accidents as there was no regulation about the gauge of the tracks for decades until Congress finally made a law. So just some examples of when we're thinking about, okay, is there a GDPR coming in the future? I think not for a while. So leverage that benefit. Something else, because I'm sort of scattershotting, like, okay, what are we thinking about in the American context? And we're going to talk about this a couple of times in different ways, but something to really keep in mind, as I'm sure any of my European friends who have lived or are living in the US can attest to, is that Americans tend to be very low context communicators in comparison to anybody else. So what do I mean by low context here? I mean that we have great difficulty in reading between the lines, and we tend to communicate fairly succinctly. And for example, my preferred type of email includes a series of bullet points and finishes with a to-do. And I say hello, but there's not a lot of relationship building in my emails. It's much more like, okay, here's the thing that needs to get done. So you need to also be thinking about, okay, how do I traditionally execute sales, and what's that going to look like in an American context, and in a storytelling context, in a pitching context? All of these things are going to come into play as you're thinking about your US expansion. And we'll hit on this again, no fear. This is, I love this because I think it's such a great example of how cultural differences can impact you as a startup founder in the context of your international expansion. So when I'm an American living in the Netherlands, and I travel frequently to Germany. And whenever I go to Germany, I always make sure to stop at an ATM and get some cash, because in Germany, I know that there are going to be plenty of places where I'll need to pay in cash and I can't pay in anything else. Whereas in the Netherlands, I pay all the time with Ideal, which is a sort of direct debit. straight from my bank account. And then I also keep in my back pocket my favorite American credit card, because I got to have those points and got to keep my credit rating up. So I'm interacting culturally in 3 different spending ways. And when you're thinking about expanding to the US, you also need to be thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to have to accept credit cards. I'm going to have to be paying those credit card processing fees, especially if you're B2C. This is a huge factor in terms of your financial projections. So really important, big impact, small thing. Again, I wish I could see your faces so that you guys could be laughing here. But things that you should expect from Americans. One of them is a compliment sandwich. So this is when an American says to you, Hasan, I really like your shirt. And Hasan says, thanks. And then I say, but did you really want to send that email and say that? It was a really good email though. So I say something nice, I give a little negative feedback, and then I say something nice again at the end. This is a compliment sandwich. And the only thing that I really cared about saying was actually that little negative thing in the middle. So even though Americans tend to be low context communicators, we give feedback in a very indirect way. So this is important to keep in mind. The other thing, and I'm sure you've seen this before, is that we tend to use a lot of punctuation, lots of exclamation marks, lots of like, oh my God, it's so good to see you. You know, I'm making a cultural generalization, but I think that sometimes this can come across as insincere, and it's not. It's just the way that we express ourselves culturally. It's not meant to diminish enthusiasm broadly. It's just, we're this excited about life. So, you know, don't take it the wrong way. And then another thing about working with Americans that's super important to keep in mind is that we expect and look for quick responses. So if I'm working with a US company and I receive an email, even if I can't give them an answer, I make sure to write them back within 24 hours and say, thanks, see, I will get back to you as soon as I have an answer. That's very different for me working here with some of my European colleagues who, you know, it's not that they're not going to answer, it's just they're waiting to find their answer and get back to me. But that might take a week and I might not hear from them in between. And that's fine. Just a difference.
The implications of things like the compliment sandwiches, right? So
yeah.
Imagine that you are in a sales meeting or like with a partner and you do your entire pitch, and in the mid, like at the end, you get this feedback. For me, the way Cassandra said all of this, like I left that conversation really happy that I don't need to change anything about myself, and like that email does not need to be tweaked. Right. But just being conscious of this fact, like it just allows you to focus on the part which is feedback, which is critical for you to kind of nail that sale afterwards, right? Or to make improvements in your sales pitch going forward as well. And then obviously like internal employee feedback as well. This is how maybe you want to give feedback to your colleagues in the US as well, because that's what they would expect. So yeah, a lot of interesting things in here. If you've ever worked with an American, which is Cassandra, you would see all these 3 things on the screen very clearly and very blatantly. She lives the stereotype.
Thanks, Hasan. I'm glad I'm a living embodiment of these things. So some other things in the same context that I think are really important to be aware of. At will employment, we already talked about this with the example. No notice, maybe 2 weeks notice, you know, and it goes both ways. It means you can fire your employees. It also means they can leave. So I think another thing that's really important is in the US, there are a lot of conversations about diversity and how important that is. And when we talk about diversity in the US, we're also talking about equity and inclusion. right? So it's not just, do you have a staff that is visually diverse, but are you making sure that everybody has equal seats at the table? You know, you can invite everybody to the table, but is everybody being served dinner together? It's sort of equity and inclusion as well. So these are really important, especially because the total addressable market in the US is so diverse. And likely, if you're a fintech startup, you are not going to be focusing on the less diverse parts of the country, which also tend to correlate with the poorer parts. But there is in the US a real correlation socioeconomic between diversity and wealth and success. So really important to keep in mind. And then another thing that's important, and this is actually a cartoon making fun of the French that appeared in a US publication that I follow, but there's a sort of joke that you can't reach anybody in a French office in August. And I think that that's really important to keep in mind, is what do Americans think about Germany, or what do they think about you? What is the stereotype that they hold in their mind? And are you going to live up to that? If an American knows that this is a German company, they're going to expect it to be run like clockwork, not like the Deutsche Bahn, but it's sort of very, very effective, very efficient, very timely. Those are going to be their expectations. So keep that in mind as well. And we are running a little behind, but that's intentional because of our guest speaker's absence. So with that, I just want to ask, before we move into the next section, if there were any questions about the US market considerations or observations, personal experiences you've had, a joke that you want to make about compliment sandwiches, anything like that? Okay. Well, if something comes up, please feel free to speak up. So the next thing that we want to talk about is the specifics of preparing for that launch. So what needs to happen internally for you to be ready to expand, in our opinion? So at weGrow, we look at this through 4 lenses. We ask ourselves, are you ready organizationally, financially, commercially, and internationally? So really, we're asking sort of probing questions about your current state and the factors that are contributing to your success right now, because these are all things that, as you're scaling and expanding internationally, will become infinitely more complex. And having systems in place that are strong now will help you in that expansion, regardless of the method via which you choose to expand. So, Hasan, yeah, please.
Yeah. Wow, you're keeping an eye on my mute button, but also it's even if you're not ready today, right? And you ask yourself these questions, it allows you to kind of diagnose like what aspect of you is not ready. Is it organizational and financial or commercial? So maybe you can't go international this year, but at least you have a clear roadmap on what you need to fix to be able to go international soon. So it helps you kind of focus and zoom into what part of readiness you need to build going forward.
Thanks. Yeah. So to dive into some of these factors, one of the first things that we look for in any readiness to expand, obviously I've talked about this already, is, do you have a diverse team? So, having people who speak multiple languages on your team is super helpful from a European perspective. It can also be really helpful from an American perspective. So in the US, indeed, there is no set language for the country, which surprises a lot of people. So there's no official US language, even though ostensibly it is English. There are a lot of pockets of diversity all over the US where there are languages other than English that are spoken. For example, in Washington, DC, which is where I'm from, the languages that the city publishes all of its information in are English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Amharic, which is the language spoken in Ethiopia. So it can totally depend, but it can also help you access market to have this diverse multilingual team, but also diverse from a perspective of gender, socioeconomic, religion, anything that adds another layer to your perspective and interpretation of your customers and a way to access them is going to be beneficial to you in the long
run. Another thing you want to look at is your experience abroad, and it says manager over here. Essentially, this is anybody who is leading your expansion in the US, and a lot of times, like, you have to pack up your bags and go and move to the US for that time period, because obviously the time differences is not really in your favor. So we see a lot of times it is the founder or a growth manager that, depending on your level of maturity in your home market, but whoever that is, having some international experience, internationalization experience is a huge plus. Why? Because, you know, internationalization, it is a complex kind of a situation where a lot of things are kind of coming together, right? You've got regulatory risk, you've got financial risk, you've got cultural risk, right? And all of these things, that experience allows you to manage this risk better. It allows you to have that knowledge and expertise to identify potential challenges and to develop effective solutions accordingly as well. And then also, I think you understand cultural differences, and there's a difference between, you know, understanding it and then actually living those cultural differences as well. So if you have that internationalization experience, you're more conscious of those things that maybe could be interpreted differently elsewhere as well. Another point is that it also gives you credibility in front of your investors, in front of your employees. It gives you that credibility of being able to successfully execute your internationalization plans in a new market. So yeah, in short, it provides you with really valuable insights and knowledge and expertise that increases your chances of success in that market.
Another thing that we look for is, do you have clients abroad already? So it's great if you've already got a pull into a new market, you've got somebody in the US who's saying, yes, I want to use your product. Because often if you've got a first client who's pulling you towards a new market, they're also going to proselytize the value that you are bringing. They're going to be people who support you and can act as testimonials to other clients in that market and maybe point you in the right direction. They might know the competitor landscape better than you, or at least have some insights into how your product is being used in this new market versus how you may have intended for it to be used or how it's used in your home market. So this is really a huge benefit as you're expanding internationally, not a requirement.
Yes, you need to have a plan for international expansion. I know this sounds really obvious, and also you have to find the right kind of mix between planning and not over planning, because sometimes you take too long and then you miss that opportunity as well. But yeah, like we will be showing you guys an expansion canvas, which kind of maps out different parts of your strategy. And what you want to do is you want to map out the plan that you have for all of these different parts of your strategy, so that you can identify potential risks, you can develop strategies that mitigate those risks, and also avoid making those costly errors that you had not really planned for. Having a strong plan also helps you maximize your resources, which if you are a startup and a scale up, you will obviously not have a lot of. financial, human, time resources. So you make better use of all of that and improve your return on investment on that. Obviously, all of these things improve your chances of success. And it also, it strengthens your organizational culture of collaboration and communication across your organization, because you create a plan, you align on that plan, and then you stick with it. So that builds that organizational culture of alignment, which is really important at a time like this. Sorry, and by the way, this is where your internationalness points end, right? So now we've moved on to your commercial readiness, which was the third point in that slide.
Thanks. Yes, we're in the, if we were playing bingo, we're now in the, I'll take commercial readiness for 100. So another thing that we look for is your sales process. So what do I mean by this? I mean, from the moment that you have a solid lead, who is the person who is talking to that lead? And who is the person who writes the proposal? Are they the same person? Does somebody in legal need to review it? Does your finance team need to review it? Is there somebody else internally who needs to contribute to it? And then once that sale is made, who's responsible for handing over the relationship? And does the person who executes the project, are they the same person as the one who's completing the sale? If not, how do you make sure that the salesperson briefs the execution manager? All of these things that, as a founder of an early stage startup, you're probably doing on your own, will likely have to be broken out into separate pieces for your team to be able to handle and also replicate as you're expanding. You as a founder cannot be in two places at once, so you also probably won't be doing all of the sales anymore, because you can't run sales in Berlin and in San Francisco and also sleep. It's just not possible. So the sales process needs to be clear and replicable.
Yeah, recurring global clients. So yes, Cassandra talked about having clients abroad, but this is about having recurring business with them as well. And if you can demonstrate that somehow, that adds a lot of credibility and also brand awareness for you. Immediately it creates and gives you that stamp of the fact that you have a track record of being able to establish trust and build confidence with potential partners. It gives you access to new markets, because these are global clients and who probably have other potential channels or other potential opportunities that you can make use of. You can share resources with these global clients as well, depending on what kind of agreements you have in place. There's a lot of knowledge sharing and expertise between yourself and the global client that you are working with as well. And this can build into the expertise that is needed for your international expansion as well.
Right. The next piece in the commercial readiness portion that we look at is your funnel visibility. So I talked about your sales process, and that's really internally what happens from the moment the lead is generated to the moment that it's handed off to a project manager. The funnel visibility is about understanding how you actually generate that lead. So do you need to cold email 1,000 potential clients who fit your ideal client profile in order to get 2 leads? Or if you email 1,000, do you get 100 leads? And where are they coming from? Are they coming from FinTech TikTok? Are they coming from advertisements at the Super Bowl? Like what is working for you, and how do you replicate that? You need to understand that in your home market, but it may not be the same in your US market. The way that you access US customers, or even the way that you can collect data on how people are interacting with your website and what you're delivering, will be different. So understanding that funnel visibility in your home market will help you to be creative about how to generate it in a new market.
If you guys have any questions, by the way, with all of these points that we're talking about, please feel free to write them in the chat. Even if you don't address them right now, like we'll be talking about that at the end of this section. Next is my favorite, your product market fit, a thing that is a term that is overused and overthrown, and as a result, it kind of loses its efficacy. But essentially, a product market fit is where you can prove that there is enough demand in your amongst your target market to be able to scale. Right. So a lot of times you probably have heard about the product market fit survey where you ask your customers, would you be, disappointed if our company, our product ceases to exist? And if 40% people say yes, that means that you do have a product market fit, because people will actually be disappointed if you don't exist anymore. Right. So yes, it's easy to calculate the product market fit in your own market, but like going into a completely new environment, the product market fit is more than just your product fitting with the market, but it's also about, are you articulating your value proposition, which is the value that you're offering to your product, in a way that's resonating with your local audience? Do you have the right channels or that you are on that your target audience is on? As well. Does your sales pitch cover all of the important points or the triggers that are going on in your customers' heads? You also want to look at what features you want to go out with, or what pricing you want to go in with as well, because it might be different in this completely new market that you're going into. You want to look at your distribution. A lot of people just get your product in a market and don't really think about how that product gets across to your customers. So like, keeping in mind what that distribution channel is it a direct channel, or are you going to go through partners? Are you going to list yourself on a marketplace? Are you going to list yourself on I mean, you guys are fintech, so there's no stores or e-stores allowed involved, but like that could be something that you also want to consider. What would fit locally? So yes, your product market fit is more than just the product itself. It's about everything else that surrounds that product, and how that product gets across and how you demonstrate that value to your customers as well. We will be talking about this in so much depth in the 2 days. So yeah, I hope I've done justice to it.
Good that we are going to give nearly 2 days to your favorite. Well, not a full 2 days, but yeah, good that we're giving you time to talk more about that, Hasan. So moving out of the commercial readiness category and into the financial readiness category, we also look to see if you as an organization have expansion goals as they relate to your finances. So if you say, okay, I want to expand to the US market and I want to earn a net revenue of 100K at the end of 1 year. Great, measurable, definable, that is a SMART goal. Good for you. Setting a clear expansion goal in relation to finances also helps you determine the line of no return. So if you are 6 months into your expansion and your positive net revenue is 0, it may be that you should cut your losses. Or maybe not. But you need to set this goal so that you can then break it into pieces and say, okay, if I haven't earned 25K by 4 months in, there's no way I'm going to make 100 by a year. And will my company survive if I don't make that 100? So it gives you the opportunity to ask these really tough questions by setting yourself up with a goal that can be broken into pieces and then, measured.
Finances, for sure, really important for you to keep an eye on your financial runway. We recommend that you have at least 6 months of financial runway for your home market. People often forget that because you are going international, you are essentially kind of dividing whatever financial resources that you do have. And and if, for instance, you think you need $100 for international expansion, my recommendation would be to multiply that with 2 at least, because almost always it takes twice the amount, twice the time to land your international expansion successfully. So yeah, like keep an eye on where you are, how much you have, and how much you need, and then multiply that by 2. At least.
And then by 2 again. Yeah. So budgeting guidelines, this, I already talked about this because this matches right up with setting goals. So set your budget, know your runway, they're all connected. Money is always connected. So I'll give it back to Hasan.
Yeah, a culture of growth, right? So there's this thing called a growth mindset. I'm not sure if you guys have heard about it, but there are 2 different types of mindset that people have. One is a fixed mindset and one is a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is that if you have a problem that comes your way, you'll be like, you give up immediately. You're like, oh, I don't have the skills necessary to deal with this problem. Somebody else has to deal with it, right? While a growth mindset is that if something comes your way, something unexpected, you might not have the skills today, but you can develop the skills that are needed to at least deal with that problem more momentarily. And that's really important going into a new market, that you, because you will have those things that are completely unexpected thrown your way. So whoever you choose to deal with international expansion, number one, you should ask them or try to gauge if they have that growth mindset, if they are able to solve the problems on their own, or at least deal with those problems on their own. And then accordingly, like create a culture around them that spreads that growth mindset around as well. There is experimentation. So experimentation, if you guys haven't really studied this, go look at growth marketing and experimentation. But these are those things that need to be part of your culture, so that you are trying out different things and not giving up if you're failing, but trying out different things and seeing what sticks, right? That's that growth culture that you want in a place where you haven't really established a foothold yet. It's all about growing. It's about getting your first. So, I mean, we've heard that, right? Getting the first 10 customers is harder than getting the next 100. So how do you get the first 10 customers? How do you break it down into small goals, digestible goals, so that you can build on that?
Thanks. Yeah. And this is just to highlight, this is our last category of readiness, which is organizational readiness. So looking at sort of under the hood, what you've got going on internally. And I think a growth culture is really a great example of that. So the next thing that we look for is good internal communication. And obviously this is critical to the success of any startup. But in particular, if you are a startup who is expanding internationally across time zones, which you very likely will be doing, you know, Berlin to New York is 6 hours, as Alexander knows very well. So do you have a way for your team to communicate and be integrated digitally, you know, or is your one person, your sort of cowboy outpost in America, joining a meeting remotely that everybody else is in person having a beer and they feel totally left out of your growth culture and everything else? So you have to make sure to find a way to even the playing field in terms of knowledge sharing in your team as you are growing internationally. And there are lots of really good, easy ways to do this, just like making sure that everybody's on Slack and available so that you can chat and be open to chatting. Making sure that calendars are accessible and clearly defined. And when you've got success, you know, making sure that people have an opportunity to meet in person. And much as we live in the digital age, it's still really critical that you form those relationships in person. I'm sure you all know this and see this, but it's good to be reminded as well.
Yeah, especially when you hire somebody new, you want to bring that person in the US market. If you hire somebody over there, you want to bring them back to your home market during the onboarding period. so that they can understand, other people that are going to be important in their lives, but also the culture that you want to create in this market going forward, and what your product is about, and what your existing customers think about you. These are all those important things that are overlooked and not really communicated if you are in different places. So take out that time, 1 week, get them to come to you. It will be worth it. And then I think this is our second last point, but you also want to have defined roles and responsibilities. So I talked about planning, right? And I talked about, and this was also the fourth step in our weGrow internationalization process, which is you put together a plan. And the idea of putting that plan down is that you define your milestones, you break those milestones down into actions, and then you assign who is responsible or accountable for that particular action. A lot of times, and this happens in so many meetings, you have really ambitious plans, you put things down, and then you leave the meeting and people are really unsure about who's going to do what, right? So being very clear about tasks, who is going to be responsible for that particular task, and then also assigning a KPI with it so that you know when you can say that this task is done, right? When can you see that, okay, this is a success from your end? By doing this exercise, what happens is, number one, you have defined roles and responsibilities, but then you're also able to identify that, hey, this is something that we don't have internally. This particular thing is kind of, maybe we need external help to be able to achieve this particular milestone. So it helps you think about what resources you have and what resources you need going forward as well.
Thanks. And going into defined roles and responsibilities and also good communication, again, these are all connected within this category. Is, do you have the tools and the workflow set up so that your person in New York can share something with the person in Berlin, and maybe they don't even have to have a live conversation? Is there a workflow in place that makes sense so that handoff can occur asynchronously? This is critical across time zones again, but also across geographies. So being clear about your expectations about how work is done, and then also providing the tools for your team to do that, is going to give you the strength to expand successfully. Oh, and that was the last point. Thank you. You reminded me, Hasan, and then I forgot. So, when we look at all of these things combined, and we actually have a readiness assessment online, it's in the LinkedIn event description, and you're more than welcome to take it just for fun, or if you don't have a company, that's fine too, just to see these points in action. But honestly, the majority of the companies that we work with are really somewhere in the middle. If you have every single one of these things set 100%, you're probably too ready to go. It's like, training for your marathon by running 100 miles. You're ready for a new challenge if everything is all set. So there's a distribution curve here that looks like this, and somewhere in between is really healthy for expansion, because some of these challenges you're going to take on and improve and iterate on as you expand. And then you'll also learn, like, oh yeah, okay, my sales funnel is actually very different in this new market. That's fine. But seeing your weaknesses and preparing for them is really helpful as well in your expansion, which is why planning and readiness assessment are things that we look at before you even start talking about expansion with the companies that we work with. Hasan, anything to add here?
Oh, I think you did right.
Okay. So that brings us to the end of preparing for launch, and I would just like to, again, pause, take a breath myself, look away from the screen for a moment and close my eyes, and ask if anybody has any questions or thoughts about what we've just presented, or wants to push back and say, you know what, actually, I don't think that a startup needs good internal communication to succeed in their expansion. Or obviously you're not going to say that, but please feel free to challenge us on any of these things, or to give your opinion, or to say, you know, that's a really insightful point that I hadn't yet considered. That's also welcome. But if anyone would like to share their thoughts, please.
And while, I mean, the general topic that we are talking about is expansion to the US, all of these points, at least the bit that we covered in section 3, are points that you could also think about, like going into, you know, other markets, and yeah, like, so a lot of it is not US specific. So yeah, a useful exercise for you to do, no matter what stage of expansion you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point, Hasan. Okay. I don't see any questions in the chat. So this is when we would have introduced our guest speaker, Daniela, who is unfortunately, as previously mentioned, not able to join us. Luckily, we have her slides, and we spoke to her extensively before this event to get her sort of thoughts and input. So we're going to talk through a bit what she was going to cover. And she's coming at this from the perspective of somebody who she is German, living in the US, and working in venture capital. So for a long time with Speed Invest, and now with Cathay Innovation, which is why we invited her, because we thought it would be cool to have like somebody from Germany who went to the US, and then me, you know, who came from the US to the EU, and then Hasan, who made this other jump himself. So, you know, we've got all of these perspectives. Again, my apologies that Daniela is not here. We will cover her content, and questions for her that we are unable to answer, we will pass on to her and then share her response with you. And then we do have time reserved again for a Q&A. So, you know, if you have questions burning that come up, please feel free to ask them then. So why had we invited Daniela to speak? Well, because she's a US resident, she's supported startup launch. She's worked in the German accelerator SV as a mentor since 2018. She was a founding mentor team member of the Henkel X, and she's now head of the US ecosystem for Cathay Innovation. So I'm sorry she's not here because she's very impressive, but that is her legitimacy. So, you know, when some of these we've already talked about, but I think it's nice to approach it also from a new perspective. So Hasan and I are going to sort of go through these, but when you're thinking about this UX expansion, and even if it's just like a dream, like, okay, I'm still early stage in my startup now, but eventually I want to get to the US, that's great, because what that means is that you already have a long-term vision. You're going to start a startup, you're going to be successful in your home market, and then you're going to expand to the US. Like, awesome. Do you know what that vision looks like? Have you defined those goals beyond just a monetary goal? And then, you know, asking yourself, is this solution that I'm offering an industry disruptor? Is it going to change the market? Is it going to change how people interact with music like Spotify, or international transactions like Wise? You know, obviously your startup doesn't necessarily have to be a unicorn, but does it have the potential? And Danny asks this question from the perspective of an investor, because obviously VCs are looking to strike gold with unicorns. But this is also touching on Hasan's favorite topic, product market fit. You know, is the capacity there for that level of success?
Yeah, and I mean, if you are a disruptor, chances are that it will be in a field where there is probably already a giant in the US. So there will be eyes on you. There will be intense competition that you would have to face. So having that vision and answering this question for you would really kind of help you set yourself up for success going into US.
Yep. And then I think also critically is can you adapt and incorporate feedback, right? So will your success in the home market be translatable into this new market? And can you make the changes that are necessary to succeed in America? So really, really critical components to be thinking about, even before you're in the US. Yeah.
And question number 4, which is, why do founders want to go to the US? You have there are so many conversations that we've had with founders who want to go to US and Japan and everywhere at the same time. And we're like, okay, yeah, but why do you want to go to the US? And a lot of times the answer is it's a huge market. And then we just want to be part of it. Yeah, it's a huge market, but it is also, an entire ocean away from you. It is a completely different time zone. It will spread you out too thin. So unless there is a strategic decision for why going to the US is critical for your growth, if you are in a conversation with me or Cassandra, like, we really kind of try to drill down if that decision is strategic enough or not, and maybe if right now is the time to go or not. Because a German company, right, like, what you want to do is maybe prove your success in a market closer to you, either in terms of culture or language, or in terms of just geographical closeness, proximity. Because then you have that credibility. Like, if you go and you talk to investors in the US, you've already proven your success in Europe. So I'd challenge you, and I'd ask you to think about, what are those markets closer by, which may not be as attractive and big as the US, but that would help you become treat them like a stepping stone to go into the US at a later point in time.
Yeah, thanks. Great points. So some of this we've already talked about, but again, really important to reiterate is also sort of thinking critically, not beyond your product market fit. What are the details, right? Like, what is the nitty gritty gonna look like here? Are you going to move to the US to expand? And when are you going to do that? Are you going to do that right at the beginning? Are you going to uproot your entire family? Are you willing to take that risk? What if it doesn't work out? What if you have to move back in a year? Is that okay with your partner, with your children, with your mother, with your dog? Like, these life questions are also really important when you're thinking about moving across an ocean, which is something that I've done several times in my life, Hasan as well. And it's not a small thing to do, and it's an even bigger thing to do when you're doing it and launching a company. So are you going to do it? What does that look like? And then, why do you think that the US offers you more opportunities than staying in Europe? I think this is a super important question, because the market, so the single currency market in Europe, the euro market, is 350 million residents. That's the total addressable market. The US total addressable market is 330 million. So by that metric, they're almost exactly the same. So why are you going to the US instead of expanding within Europe, where you're already compliant with the regulations, you can already accept this currency, et cetera, et cetera? What is the value for your company of going to the US? And then asking also, do you currently generate sales? So this is that question that we were asking is, do you have a pull into the market? Is there already demand? Sometimes this is a chicken and an egg question with the next one, which is, are you looking for investment, or do you have investment there? We do see that some startups, particularly in the fintech space, are expanding to the US because they have American investors who are looking for that expansion to occur in US soil. That makes sense too. That's a pull. So if you're looking for investment in the US, you're probably also going to want to consider expanding and what that looks like. And you'll be more attractive for investment if your expansion plan is thought out, detailed, and considerate, and answers a lot of these questions. And I saw something come up in the chat. So it says, for example, Peloton is.
So his question is, how can
Yeah.
you tell if big fish will disrupt you or not fintech? Yeah, there's no way to know going into a new market if the big fish will disrupt you or not. But what we see in the US is a lot of the times, like a bigger bank would probably try to partner with you in their like an entrepreneurship innovation program or something along the lines of that. So yes, there you could get support from a big fish, or you could just get pushed out. So that brings you to the last point as well, the regulation bit. So making sure that you've got your IPs covered, going into a market like US, because you are exposing yourself to these big fish. And having all of your documentation and IPs and trademarks in place is going to make sure that that you're safeguarded from this. There is this culture of suing in the US, which may not be as strong as in the Europe, like maybe in Europe, but maybe Cassandra, you can comment a little bit more on that. So all the more reasons for you to make sure that you're not really stepping on any toes that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's sort of the same idea as what I was talking about earlier, the opt-in versus opt-out, right? In Europe, you opt in and there are lots of consumer protection. And the necessity for lawsuits is much lower because there are already protections in place to keep you safe. And the judicial system isn't set up as a sort of okay, we're going to punish you when you do something wrong, but until then, everything is fine. Right. So it's also that question when you think about lawsuits. But I think also going back to this idea about like attracting big fish or not, I think it's also a question of, have you created something that is brand new, as Netflix did with streaming? Or are you sort of rocking the boat on something that already exists? And to what extent is that going to attract interest within your market and externally to that as well? So you need to think about, okay, what does my solution actually mean within the market? And again, that goes back to what Hasan was saying about the competitive landscape. So. And I think that fits nicely into this idea that when you're thinking about a US expansion, or any expansion, that there is not one absolute solution. There is not one way to do this that works for everyone. It's totally going to depend on you. Are you B2B? Are you B2C? Are you B2G? Are you B2B to B to B to C? How does that look for you? What is your ideal customer profile? Where do they live? What are you asking from them? What are you offering them? All of these will impact what your go-to-market strategy is. You're not going to reach senior citizens who are living off their retirement pension on TikTok. So I can't tell you to use TikTok as part of your go-to-market strategy. So, the answer in terms of, okay, what does my go-to-market look like is it depends.
Yeah. And also, a lot of a mistake that founders often make is that they treat US as one market, while it's not. Like within US, like states are like drastically different from each other in terms of, habits and behaviors, beliefs and culture, and maybe channels that they use. So all of these kind of affect the plan that you have going to that market. And maybe Cassandra is in a better position to talk about those differences between states, but it's really important to treat those states as different markets, and not have that one size fits all approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I talked about that a little bit earlier, but these are also questions that sort of call back to what are you offering? So it ends up being sort of a bit circular in some ways until you define what it is that you're looking for, what you're selling, and who your customers are. So, you know, for you, the founder of a fintech startup, it's really important that you are involved in this go-to-market strategizing, and that this becomes a thing that has organizational buy-in from the top down. So you need to really understand what the potential is in the new market, based on the assumption that you also very much understand what's happening in your home market. You are the person with the bird's eye view, and therefore you're the one who's most likely to understand the implications in differences between the two markets. So this is a time when you should be and need to be really hands-on. Would you agree with that, Hasan?
100%. I especially, you know, in things like talking to your customers. So when you are doing market research, you need to be part of those conversations. Even if somebody else is, you know, leading those conversations, just sit and observe and focus on the kind of words they're using, the kind of questions they're asking, because that kind of gives you a handle on how they think. Like nothing better can prepare you for expansion if you are part of those conversations. This is something that we do all the time. Like my job is to go out and do research for scale-ups that want to go international in those local markets. But we always make sure that at least in some of those conversations, the founder is there or whoever is leading the expansion is there as well, so that it's not all hearsay, but like they're really kind of feeling that conversation as opposed to just getting a summary of it. So rolling up your sleeves, getting your hands dirty, these are, and also setting targets for yourself. A lot of times when you are setting targets, it's all about, hey, I want to get a sale or these many sales. But this is about setting targets for how many people do I want to talk to every week? Do I need to be talking to 1 or 2 or 3 customers, depending on how easily your customers are available as well. So, or potential customers are available as well. But like set those targets for yourself so that you can really get the pulse. And the last point is also like, which is if you feel like there is a gap in your capacity or your understanding, then that should be how you hire in that market as well. So if you're really strong in sales, but you know marketing really isn't your thing, then going into that market, the US expansion person or the first person that you hire should fill those gaps for you. And yeah, like here at Growth Tribe, we do a hiring scan. So over here, we look at what you have internally, what your needs are, what are the gaps, and then accordingly, like we come up with a plan for hiring. An exercise like this is something that you should also be doing for yourself going into that market.
And then some questions to ask yourself, again, sort of going back to that nitty gritty is, are you going to be legally incorporated in the US, or are you just going to have a subsidiary there? And this is something where we highly recommend that you talk to a tax attorney, preferably one who has expertise in both the US market and your home market of Germany. So, you know, if you're going to be incorporated, that's probably because you're looking for, or you've gotten US funding and you want to have an office on the ground, so you're going to move there. You know, there has been more movement from US funds towards investment in European companies. That is true, but there is still often a strong request to come to the US and set up there if you're going to accept US-based funding. So that's something to consider.
And there are different laws in different states regarding the need to be incorporated or not. So that all the more reasons for having a legal tax advisor who understands the different regulations in different states in the US.
Right. And then can also help you deal with the taxes, right? Because you've got federal taxes, and then you've got state taxes, and then you've got city taxes, and you've got It's never simple. So, you know, maybe you just want to simplify things and be a subsidiary, but will that be enough? And you still need to get a business license. You still need to be able to accept American payment processing. So these are questions that you want to think about and understand the pros and cons of. Obviously, you know, if you do a subsidiary and you change to being incorporated, that's possible. It creates some work down the road. Okay, so one of the last things that we want to talk about is your elevator pitch. So in March, we are going to have, as Hasan has mentioned, and Alexander as well, a 1.5-day long workshop series on sort of incorporating your expansion plan into your pitching. But before we talk about pitching on a grand scale, we also just wanted to talk briefly about your elevator pitch. So how do you describe simply and effectively what it is that you and your company do in the space of a single elevator ride? The reason that we bring this up in the context of expansion is because your elevator pitch will be different in the US than it is in Germany. Part of that is the way that Americans receive communication and like to tell stories. So Americans like to hear the happy ending, the success, right at the beginning. We put a man on the moon. And how are we going to do that? Well, now I'll tell you, boopity boopity boop. I'm going to put a spaceman in a Tesla, blah, 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 blah. The success comes at the beginning. The highest point of the story is right at the beginning, and then how you get there might be the rest of the pitch. In Germany, storytelling can be very different. The process is hugely important. How you get there, the research that you've done, the requirements, the analyses, the engineering, all of this leads to a climax in the result that you deliver. So flipping the way that you tell your story on its head can be very effective for your American audience. And that's something to keep in mind, because your elevator pitch in particular is deeply personal and reflects who you are as a founder and as an individual. So you want to make sure that the story that you're telling still resonates with you and that you still believe in it as it's being told. You just want to tell it for a different audience.
Yeah. And as the name suggests, like, this is the elevator pitch, right? Like, you want to nail it hard from the beginning. So that opening that Cassandra suggested is key.
Yeah, thanks. So this is a framework on expansion, just to sort of give you a sense of the process and what is being looked at in the context of preparation and then execution, and also from a funding perspective. So, you know, a lot of these things we talked about in the context of readiness, and readiness and preparation for launch, you know, they run in parallel. So just these are things that you want to consider at this very early stage of many of the things that we spoke about, but then also logistical stuff like, how are you going to get a visa? What's that going to look like without investment from a US-based VC? You know, are you going to set up a company, or are you going to have a sponsor in the company from the US? You know, this sort of critical question of what is that going to look like? And certainly their organizations can help. But then really doing your research and framing your solution in a context that Americans understand and value is going to be so critical to the success of your expansion. And this is where we do a lot of our work, is in this sort of US validation step 2 at the scaling. But then there are certainly many things to consider as you move forward. And these require a level of niche expertise. Like, for example, we would not be able to advise you on legal implications of a subsidy versus an incorporation. So we can only tell you that you need to make a choice, but you would want to talk to an expert about those things. Anything to add?
Yeah, I would take a screenshot of this because this is almost like a cheat sheet. So so different steps before, during, and after in order to grow over there as well. So yes, we have talked about almost all of these things over here, but like this could be like just a final check when you are planning your expansion into the US, like if you've got all of these different things covered. I also want to emphasize on the US ecosystem. So I know Berlin and Amsterdam, we have a really strong startup ecosystem. So this is not news for us. But I mean, the US has a much stronger startup ecosystem as well. There's a lot of support that you can get from the tech companies over there and from accelerators and knowing that ecosystem is definitely going to be going to take you a long way, but then also think of like it'll help you come up with those opportunities that you otherwise might not think about.
Yeah.
And by the way, like if you're planning on going to the US in next year, already start developing that network, start connecting with people virtually, maybe even make a trip to the US, meet some serious connections, visit those accelerators. Definitely would recommend that.
Yeah. So to reiterate, or in conclusion, you know, should you enter the US market is really, this is a question that you need to answer, that the research needs to be done on. Like, have you validated? Have you done your research? Have you found that product market fit? Have you already thought about who your customers might be and your competition? This is going to be crucial to your US expansion and to any expansion, honestly. So something to keep in mind, I would take a screenshot of this too. So do you want to add anything? We've got a lot of product market fit here, so.
Yeah, I mean, I was just very conscious of how much time we had when we were talking about product market fit earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, like over here, there are things that you can do sitting in Berlin to test out the US market. You can run experiments on your competitors to see what kind of customer acquisition costs to expect in the US, right? So you'll be really surprised to know that in US, like digital paid media is relatively cheaper compared to paid media over here, especially on social platforms. So what you could do is like start creating either a dummy business and promoting it to your audience in the US, just to see what kind of what channels work better, what kind of customer acquisition costs, which I already talked about, what kind of copy resonates locally as well. There are different types of experiments. There's a smoke test, there's a trigger test, and all of this would help you just shape your strategy to the US before you even enter. So please know that in order to validate the US market, you don't have to physically be there. It's good if you are. You can already start validating it sitting where you are.
Nice. Good. Really important to point out.
Yeah, and if you want to talk about experimentation in general, I can, feel free to get in touch on LinkedIn or in the 2 days that we will have together. Definitely be talking more about this.
And I think that feeds nicely into this other question, which is the timing right? So it's not just a question of, do you have that product market fit and do you have the knowledge that it's going to take, but are you ready to go? Can you, if you've set a goal, a revenue goal that involves not earning anything for a year, are you going to be able to survive? Or can you hire somebody in the US market to help you out? You know, it may be that you have good product market fit, but that the timing isn't right. And then maybe you want to pursue another solution like hiring a sales manager in country, or doing some of this testing that Hasan is talking about, doing a light version of your expansion. But this is just as important a question as the previous one, which is, you know, should you?
On the next slide, you can already see what are the kind of things that you want to test in a product market fit. So obviously you want to see if you can get an idea about the size of the market. And obviously in that total addressable market, do you have a strong enough fit? Feedback, any positive feedback that you were able to get on your product or service, and do you have a minimum viable product that you can already start showing to people? And does the USP that you have at home, is that same USP resonating, or maybe do you need to reframe it or re-articulate it, or maybe reprioritize the different benefits that you have in your unique selling proposition? And if you don't have a PMF, product market fit, there are certain symptoms for it. So if those symptoms are things that are also things that are real for you, then maybe there might be some value in you going back and rethinking if this is the right time for you or not. So number one, you're in a sales meeting, your customers don't really understand the value proposition. You really have to explain it and re-explain it and convince them. There's a lot of convincing that goes into just to demonstrate your value. That's a symptom. There are low number of sales, very obvious. Customers use your product once, but then they don't really come back for more. So that means that they haven't been activated in the middle, or maybe they were activated, but that activation wasn't strong enough. So both lead to low retention. If your sales cycle take really long, then maybe there is also questions that you should be asking yourself about your product market fit. And the last one is that people are not really talking about you. So that could mean either in terms of, you know, telling their network or giving you feedback or giving you reviews, but like, but that would mean that you're missing that passion. Passion, I guess, is an overkill, but yeah, that drive from your customers to really tell other people about the experience that they have. Because, you know, as humans, we have that tendency, if you experience something good, you want to tell other people about it. So if they're not doing that, then that means that there's some work that needs to be done on the product market fit.
And ending on a high note. So thanks for that, Hasan. And I want to give another opportunity for the people in our audience to ask any questions, challenge any ideas, share any good resources. Yeah.
You know, one thing I've learned the past year,
yeah,
actually it's been 3 years now, is in calls like these that are generally virtual, you want to give people some time to also think and kind of just marinate in the information that we have till you ask questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, if nothing is coming to you right now, that's completely okay. I think maybe I can share with Cassandra. I can't share on the chat, but maybe you can share your LinkedIn.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't realize that you didn't have that.
Yeah. Or alternatively, you could share the last slide, which has those QR codes as well.
I stopped sharing too soon, huh?
Feel free to get in touch with myself and Cassandra, and we can talk about any aspect of what we discussed today in more detail.
Yeah, also speaking from the off here, thank you, Cassandra, Hasan, for this great presentation and all the insights shared with us. You did a good job also covering Daniela's part, and I believe we have a lot of takeaways from this session. So maybe from my side, as we're running this program for Berlin FinTechs going to the US, Cassandra and Hasan will be with us in March 21st and 22nd in Berlin to run a 2-day workshop sprint in order to have more in-depth coaching, mentoring on all the steps towards the US market. So please feel free to reach out also to me to get to know more about the FinTech Leaders Program and also the workshop, which is open, I think, for application. And please reach out to me as well.